spending the winter in Florida, but I worked full-time teaching IT at Hennepin Technical College in Minneapolis for almost 30 years, retired, and now I do lots of things. I'm an instructional designer at Metropolitan State University in Minnesota, and then I teach at 3 different Minnesota State 2- and 4-year colleges and universities.
You may have noticed I'm presenting from Athens, Greece. I just shut my video off and invite others to go ahead and turn their videos off too, just in case we have anyone from areas of bandwidth that aren't really sure if you're going to be connected as well or not. So we're going to kind of keep that to a minimum. We'd like to start off with just the opening discussion here of inclusivity, that is, learning design for all. One of the things that we really have spotted as we get into the learning design here is that faculty and instructional designers, as you know, have to consider many factors when you're designing courses. And so often one of the things that they overlook, and Karen, you can go ahead and advance the slides, is the student's orientation to others and the world around them, notably if they're introverted or they are extroverted. So in learning design, Carl Jung popularized the theory of the psychological types way back in 1912. And from this, the Myers-Briggs folks went ahead and developed their well-known Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. Many of you have probably taken that. In plain language, extroverts, the way Jung spelled it, tend to gain energy by interacting with others, while introverts tend to gain energy by reflecting internally. And Karen, it hasn't advanced on my screen yet here. So I want you to consider your place on the introvert-extrovert scale. So reflect on the following. In general, when attending a large event, do you feel energized and ready for more? Or are you tired and drained, even though you had fun? And Karen, let's go ahead and ask them the first question that we'd like to get them to contribute with.
So we'd like to know, do you consider yourself more of an introvert or an extrovert? And reflect upon this. Feel free to add it in the chat. And what characteristics do you possess that make you lean that way? You know, why do you feel that you are introvert or extrovert? Okay, a lot of you think you're introverts. Couple extroverts, some are right in the middle. Okay, this is a good one. After an event with a lot of people, I feel I need to go home and recharge. Just have some space to myself, but they think they're an introvert. Couple extroverts. Whoa, there's an ambivert in there. Large gatherings tire me, but I enjoy them sometimes. And then one person said situational, so I suppose it depends on what's going on.
You know, one of the things that we discovered in doing a little more research on this is that actually more faculty tend to be introverts than extroverts. And yet you think, well, you know, faculty stand up in front of a class, they talk about things, they share all kinds of information. They must be very comfortable doing that. However, I think that as we kind of dove into that, we started to realize that a lot of extroverts are good at moving around the room and talking with others. More of the introverts tended to be people who would lecture and everything that way. Karen, can you back up a slide? You got a little ahead of me on that one. So the characteristics of introverts are that they gain energy from being with others. Their thinking feeds off from that idea of being around other people. Introverts prefer to keep more to themselves. So being asked to contribute their ideas on the spot may stress themselves rather than actually energize them. All right, so that's one of the things that becomes kind of important. Extroverts enjoy thinking aloud, sometimes starting with one idea or answer and eventually arriving at a whole different one because they're talking it through and they're enjoying that, or they're listening to what other people are saying and they're readjusting what it is that they're thinking about. Introverts tend to be quiet, they reflect, they problem solve. They sometimes enjoy writing alone. If a class or work environment isn't designed in that sort of way, introverts may not achieve their work potential or their learning potential that way. So introverts may actually examine work challenges in a deeper dig. They're thinking more analytically and with sustainable problem solving skills. And I think what's really interesting about that is that the introverts will tend to assess a little bit more on reflection, and that they tend to add that to the discussion, or add that after they've had the time to process internally first. So on the next slide, we talk about the challenges. And the challenge for introverts, or for course designers and for faculty, is simply going to be that faculties and designers tend to design courses that are more reflective and internalized. Extroverted faculty and designers will design courses that capitalize more on student interaction. They don't mean to favor one or the other, but they unconsciously gravitate to that type of learning. And so when you think of yourself as being an introvert or an extrovert, one of the things that becomes really important is that we begin to think about how you design your course. And obviously, we want to have folks who are going to champion both introverts and extroverts by giving them experiences so that they ground themselves in the material, the content, and the process of learning. But you also want to stretch them a little bit so that they get a little bit beyond all that. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So Deirdre Faye Jackson has done a lot of work in this, and one of the things that's interesting, you can go ahead and watch her TED talk on this. She provides a great deal of information. One of the things that we really look at is in academia, people who are introverted are somehow less valued than their extroverted colleagues. As we've talked with faculty in workshops that we've delivered and things that way, we find out that, yeah, oftentimes they feel a little slighted. They feel as though the extroverts get more attention. I think when you go back to thinking about when you were a student, you may have felt, those of you who identified as being more introverted, you may have identified yourself as seeing that same kind of opportunity where extroverts got the attention, introverts didn't get the attention because they didn't, just shout out. They didn't really go into the whole idea of I won't call it showing off, but they just didn't express themselves verbally as quickly as introverted students did. So when we think about it, extroverts sometimes will look at introverts with this sort of not ready for prime time bias. I think many will begin to think about that the extrovert should be everyone's goal. And it may be common to have students or faculty think that normal is everyone getting to become an extrovert, an expert at being an extrovert, causing some of the introverts to actually have some self-esteem issues. And so I think what ends up happening is, you've been in classroom situations before, whether they were face-to-face or not, you start to realize that many times extroverts did really, really well in those face-to-face situations. With the pandemic and moving things to online, you may have noticed that there's equal amount of time for self-reflection and being able to really think about your answers, think about what you want to contribute more than you have normally done that in the past. So it gives a little bit more of a level playing field, and it gives those who have been introverted a little bit more success, or a little opportunity for success. Remember that as many as a third to a half of the population are actually extroverts. That's a lot. Karen, let's ask everyone another question to contribute in chat.
So now I want you to reflect and think about this and answer in chat if you wish. What experiences have you had as an introvert or an extrovert that have made you feel like one is more preferred than the other? So what do you think? Introvert or extrovert?
So I like what Kim has offered here in meetings that feel left out sometimes because you get the same extroverted set of the population talking and being able to share that information. Or sometimes, again, introverts want to think a little bit more about it. Greg shares that, and we're zipping a little back and forth here, so it's great. And thank you for the contributions here. Greg was talking about you want to be able to sort of form that same level of connection, and sometimes being able to think that through or having the time to think that through is important.
And someone else said they're an introvert, but best practices, of course, support group work and discussions, which are more difficult for them. And I think that's true for many of our students. Some can go back and forth between the two.
So let's go back to the qualities of both of these. Let's look at introverts versus extroverts. Imagine if there was a world filled with only one type. Everyone sort of, if it was all introverts or all extroverts, and we'd miss the talents and the skill sets that others can bring in there. So extroverts may rush forward to complete work on time, or at least getting work done by checking the boxes. Introverts may want to examine and sort of dig a little deeper. Developing teams that include both introverts and extroverts working in tandem can create a broader way of thinking and thinking critically and innovatively. You can really get a chance to delve into that. I think that course design needs to value each of these equally. And we need to begin to think about how we're preparing students to succeed in the workplace and collaborate effectively with others. And of course, that's exactly what the people who are hiring our graduates are taking a look at is how is it that students can actually get out there, become employees in the workplace and produce well and really feel comfortable and happy with the workplace, especially that way. So when we move to this, I want you to intentionally consider how to guide students to move from extroversion to introversion and vice versa, because both models are actually going to have benefits. So let's take a look at the next slide. You may notice that extroverts enjoy talking in front of the class, or they're the ones who will unmute themselves and talk in your Zoom sessions. All right. Introverts may appear to hold back a little bit. And I think in the past, we've thought of that as being, they're not understanding, or they're not really getting it as quickly as the other students are. But yet at the same time, they'll hold back, but they will share once they get a chance to process it and be able to talk with one another, or talk in a more process-oriented sort of way rather than simply jumping in. So instructors are usually able to see more evidence of thinking with the extroverted students, but because they're going to be a lot more verbal or a lot more external about communication, and they're going to tell you that. You may see that right up front. However, given the time, they might begin to think of that a little bit. So as one of you put in there in your comments before, as we move to the next slide, we really need to take a look at creating ambiverts. So one of your goals in designing courses for significant learning should consider transforming the skill sets of extroverts and introverts into becoming ambiverts, teaching them to learn from one another and move along the spectrum as the situation changes and requires a different approach. That's why I also enjoyed the response of the person that says it's situational. It depends what situation I'm in. And I think as adults and faculty members, as you are, that becomes kind of an interesting thought that as we do get older, we do tend to take on more of the attributes of ambiverts. So let's take a look at what ambiverts do. Ambiverts know when to push and when to pull back. They know when to speak up, when to listen, and adapt to what the situation requires. They can learn from one another to switch strategies to complete the work, because sometimes it really is about the work. It's not about you as the person. What do you need to be able to do? Think about your students as they're going to be working with clients, customers, patients, any other group of people in the future. What are they going to need to be able to do? Because imagine working in a doctor's office as a nurse Every patient you come across is going to be a different situation for you. You're going to need to be able to do that. Same thing if you are a car mechanic. What are the kinds of things that you need to do there? Or a clinical psychologist. You're going to need to be able to adapt and work differently with the people, take them where they are and work more with them. Ambiverts are also typically more emotionally stable and resilient. I think it's because of that adaptability. And then they think, act, and behave in a more consistent manner, following that same train of thought. They tend to be able to adjust, monitor, and adjust, which becomes an important part. So, as I said before, most of us are ambiverts as adults. We have, the more experience we get, we learn to be stronger ambiverts. So here's what I'm going to have you begin to do on the next slide. Let's take a look at when students come in, especially those of you who teach 100, 200 level classes, they kind of are used to that, either an extrovert or introvert type of course. And so they anchor themselves in those positions. And if they're an introvert, they say, well, you know, we're doing a lot of group stuff and I don't like that. And hence, you know, you may have problems retaining those people in your courses. Or if they're doing a lot of reading and writing of things and thoughts and whatever it is before they get to contribute aloud, again, the extrovert students may have a difficult time with that. So as we look at creating ambiverts, the goal of designing courses is really to move students closer to the center. Karen, I think you're ahead on the slides at this point. So you stay where you are because I'm going to catch up right there. Okay. So when we really look at course design strategies, and again, go ahead and advance it back to there. There we go. Online learning really gave us a chance to begin using learning management system tools to create more of a balance between the extrovert and introvert oriented learning. So when students learn asynchronously, they have the time and the place to think, act, and then analyze how others have responded. That encourages sort of deeper reflection of all of your students. During the synchronous times, those of you who may be running them with web conference sessions, you're having some sort of a live session, maybe even now hybrid, back together face-to-face in the classroom, you observe many of the participants unmuting or sharing or typing responses in the chat tool, or you may also have them contributing more in discussions. And consequently, what we've heard a lot from faculty has been, you know, liking the hybrid areas right now to be able to deliver your course because you have that time for conversation with one another and you have individual work time to be able to do that online to come prepared to have those conversations. That really benefits both sets of students. So providing the opportunities and time for those who prefer to type responses is one of the successful strategies for students using the discussions tool in the LMS. You can read what somebody wrote, and then you can think about it, respond to it, and even have the chance to come up with a citation or an idea or a work experience or something that is beneficial and really adds to the entire group. All right. So let's take a look at writing prompts. As we know now, and especially in using the tools for AI like a chat GPT, the responses or the writing prompts become very important as to what you're going to be able to do. Having students critique those and being able to use writing the proper prompts gives you better information coming back. So as a faculty member or a designer, writing the prompts will get you the better information coming from students. It's going to get them to give you better thinking, better answers, a deeper dive into the course. By requiring students to post maybe before seeing the other responses, they still get the chance to go off the top of their head what they think they'd like to be able to say about it, not worrying about whether or not 3 other people have already said something similar. So sometimes that's a strategy that gets people, giving them a chance to be able to dig a little deeper. So, and the other side of that is that not one person in the class gets to post the response, and then everybody else just kind of hangs back because, well, they already said that, so I've got nothing to contribute. Students can uncover their own thinking without being influenced by other posts. They can really get a chance to kind of do that deep dive first and get that contribution coming toward the class before worrying about what other people wrote, and then they can respond to those other students once they've been able to post, if your LMS allows you to do that. Now, one of the things that we think is really critical is to provide rubrics for students so that they get a chance to sort of self-assess. And I'd like to just, if you want to go ahead and contribute in chat, just let us know how many of you are actually using rubrics for discussion, so students have an idea of what they should be talking about, how in depth they should be talking, responding, giving information, creating additional resources or using data, just being able to use rubrics for your discussions and be able to get students to be able to contribute that way. And as you go ahead and share any of that information, we'll move on to the next slide and take a look at some course design strategies. On the left side, you can see a variety of learning activities. And then you can see how it's both good for introverts and it's good for extroverts. So I'm going to take the 1 minute paper as an example. For introverts, they can sort of self-assess by formulating their questions, responses carefully. What am I understanding? What am I not understanding? For extroverts, it really gives them more of a chance to think about it deeper first, rather than giving you an off-the-cuff kind of quick answer. Really kind of dive into that. Now, 1 minute papers don't go very deep, I realize that. So let's take something a little bit deeper, like team projects. Again, involving them with peers for introverts lets them choose a role that they're most comfortable with, something that they can use as strength that an introvert may actually get to be. It might be a researcher. It might be a person who is a quality checker. It could be a person who asks additional questions somewhere in the group project roles. For extroverts, it allows full participation and collaboration. So they're loving that because there's conversation, there's those things going on. And obviously, getting them to sort of think about jumping back and forth, and depending as to where you are in your curriculum, for those of you who are working 300 and 400 level courses, you may want to really start switching those roles around to get them out of their comfort zone and get them into the idea of expanding their skills. And so what I really want you to do is, as we continue on here, let's take a look next at the sort of the tools that are involved in the LMS that may help you with that. All of these tools will help you take extroverts and convert them to ambiverts. They'll take introverts and convert them to ambiverts, because you'll give them something they're more comfortable with, but you'll also be providing them maybe with some other kinds of things that they're not as comfortable with. And so you're really beginning to try to expand their skills. And many of you undoubtedly at this point, especially after the pandemic, are used to using these. When we worked with faculty, when they were getting used to changing things over for the first time to becoming just before the pandemic and had to turn their courses to online courses from face to face, many of them weren't using all of these tools in their LMSs, so they had them all over the place, and they were petrified because of the fact that they really needed to begin to look at what it is that I could do. How could I recreate that face-to-face experience, and how could I use these tools? I'd like you to think about one course right now, a course that you have. Maybe you think it's your best course. Maybe you think it's the course you're not as most comfortable with. And let's take a look at the next slide. And this is an activity that we do with faculty when we help them redesign. So imagine that you would list the activities, assignments, or assessments that lean toward that extroverted side. How many do you have? When you go through all of the things that you do in your course, are yours leaning toward the extrovert side? Or let's go to the right side, the introvert side. Are the activities, assignments, and assessments leaning there? And by actually creating the list here, you begin to see how balanced your course is. And of course, you want to strike a balance. Obviously, you want to try and create more activities, assignments, and assessments, especially in the 300 to 400 level courses, that will get students to begin to think about what it is that they're able to do, that they can really shift by situation. You can even get students to talk about that. and really get them to think about in the workplace, if this situation takes place, how would you deal with that? Or if you had to work with an introvert and you're an extrovert, how would that situation work for you? What kinds of skills would you have to have? But by listing all of the different activities, assignments, and assessments, you begin to see, it's a little bit like when you want to lose weight, you start writing down all the foods that you've been eating during the day, and you start to realize you were snacking on a lot of things you didn't really want to be snacking on, and then you wondered why you couldn't lose weight. For those 8 cans of diet soda, I'm not losing any weight. You started paying attention to it. And so faculty get a lot of aha moments when they go through this and they take a look at this. We find that it's really, really, really interesting to really take a look at that balance and to be able to work with students so that as we try to retain students, and I was listening to the morning show this morning, as some of you were as well, they were get to talk a little bit about this whole, what happened to faculty, what happened to students during the pandemic, you know, how people are just kind of surviving and they're lukewarm and everything that way. These are things that we can be doing to try and meet the needs of the students that are walking into our classrooms face-to-face, or that they are there online. All right. So Karen, one of the things that we'd like to talk about next is the idea that we do have actually a course that we created that dives a little deeper here. And so one of the things that you could do is, if you want to take a look, you can go to Designing Courses for Introverts and Extroverts, Inclusivity in Action. It's a course that we really created so that it's a self-paced tutorial online course, something that you could do that way, that you could take a look at. If you do purchase the course, you receive a complimentary ebook, the Designing Effective Teaching and Significant Learning, that Karen and I and a few of our colleagues wrote, and you get a certificate of completion. And you can do that by going to insynergy.com, and you'll get a chance to take a look at the education shop with online courses, and get a discount if you type in Synergy 20. So you get an opportunity to take a look at that. There's actually 13 different courses altogether. And so let's take a look at the last slide and give you a chance, if you want to contact myself or Karen. Karen didn't get to talk a lot during this presentation because she was staffing and manning and doing all the rest of the stuff that we needed to do here. She'll do a lot more in our next 2 presentations that we have at 10 and 11. But really, we wanted to take a look at, there's a copy of the book. That's the ebook that you can get, or you can buy it from, you can certainly buy it from Stylus and purchase it there and get the paperback. For those of you who love to hold on to a book and things that way, but you can get and see more information at insynergy.com. We just bring that up because we've got a place that we want to put everything. We're going to open it up for questions and thoughts and ideas right now. We've got some time, and really talk about the whole idea of what your experiences have been during your course design, your work. What have you noticed about introverts and extroverts in your classes? And so you can either put them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, feel free to unmute, and we'll go ahead and answer them and talk about them.
Now, don't be shy.
Karen, I think they're all doing that activity where they're listing the courses. They're trying to figure out what their activities were, how many introverted ones.
Yeah. And many of them said they just like to sit back and ponder after they hear something. So that's good too.
That's right. That's why this is sort of a lurking session, but at the same time, it's kind of like, feel free to contribute. What have been your struggles, either as a student or as a faculty member or designer of instruction?
I was glad to see many of you do already use rubrics for your activity. So that's great.
Well, if there are no questions, feel free to run, grab a snack, use the restroom, get another cup of coffee. But we'd be glad to, we'll stay on here, and if you have any questions, feel free to do that. We are going to present a session on the future of higher ed, the future of learning and designing learning for the future at 10 o'clock. That is a more jam-packed session that we have. We got a lot of great information. If you're interested in learning about badges and micro-credentials, the whole AI tools and some of the things that we need to consider as we go through that. I've been reading a lot of things about that and working with some faculty on really the pedagogy behind those online tools with AI.
Please don't forget to complete the session evaluation form. The link is in the chat.
We'd like to thank everyone for attending. And like I said, we'll stay on here a little longer and feel free to open things up. Unmute if you'd like, talk directly with us, or use the chat and we'll answer your questions.